It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon when little Emily, just 8 years old, went missing. Her absence was noticed just minutes later, but it already seemed too late. In that imposing mansion, where security and control were paramount, the girl's disappearance brought an unimaginable wave of despair. The security cameras showed the girl happily running when something suddenly caught her attention: a small white rabbit disappearing among the trees. Fascinated, Emily followed it, leaving behind the tall walls and the safety of the mansion. Minutes later, chaos would begin. When the housekeeper called her for dinner, there was no answer, and terror set in. Everyone was frantically searching for Emily. The whole town was in an uproar, and headlines about her disappearance were already circulating. Out there, a dog was sniffing the air, as if he knew something that everyone else was missing. He ran toward the forest behind the mansion, where the search had failed. There, in the midst of the darkness, something unexpected happened that would leave everyone speechless. The stray dog was a constant figure around the streets and alleys of the wealthy neighborhood, where mansions and perfect gardens made up the landscape. He was a street dog with no name, no owner, wandering in search of food. Most residents avoided him, their employees shooed him away, and even the children kept their distance. Except for one, little Emily. Emily always had a kind look for him. Whenever her parents weren't looking, or when the housekeeper was busy, she would approach, stroke his head, and give him scraps from her snack. Sometimes she'd smile and whisper kind words, knowing that somehow the dog would understand. He watched her from a distance, never barking or causing trouble. But to him, this girl was different from all the others. She saw something more than a neglected creature. While chaos took over the mansion, the dog began to sniff the air. His sharp nose picked up Emily's scent, mixed with the forest leaves. Without anyone noticing, he silently slipped into the trees, following the girl's trail. He knew where she had gone. That dense and silent forest, which intimidated humans, didn't scare him. He had wandered through it before, searching for shelter and food. Every step the dog took was guided by a mix of instinct and an invisible connection to the girl. While the search team was lost, he moved forward with purpose, driven by something greater than just gratitude. In that moment, he wasn't just an abandoned stray. He was Emily's only hope. The silence inside the Carter mansion was deafening. Olivia trembled, clutching a photo of Emily with her blonde curls and innocent smile. Richard, standing by the window, stared into the distance, his jaw clenched, his mind racing, unsure where to begin. It was as if for a moment the power and wealth that controlled the world around them meant absolutely nothing. Emily, their only child, was missing, and no amount of resources seemed enough to bring her back. Outside, the forest was beginning to darken. The search team moved in all directions, scouring every inch of the terrain. Voices echoed through the trees, calling Emily's name, but all that answered was the muffled sound of the wind through the leaves. While the hurried footsteps of men with flashlights cut through the silence of the woods, no one imagined that a nameless stray dog, ignored by all, was already far ahead, guided by a silent and invisible purpose. He sniffed the ground with intensity, his nose alert, his body agile despite visible weakness. Emily's trail was there, scattered among broken leaves, mixed with that soft scent he knew so well. The bond they had, built through small gestures and quick glances over months, was his only compass. Fear of the darkness didn't touch him. All that mattered was finding her. In the middle of the forest, lost and terrified, Emily was beginning to feel the weight of solitude. The trees around her seemed endless, forming a green, shadowy labyrinth. With each step, her heart beat faster, tears streamed down her face, and her desperation grew. She hugged herself, feeling the cold bite into her delicate skin, looking in every direction, unsure where to run. "Daddy, Mommy," she murmured between sobs, not knowing her voice would never reach their ears. The fear of never being found began to take over, as if each second was pulling her further away from hope. But then, something changed. Amidst the distant rustling of trees and the cold wind that began to blow, Emily heard a familiar sound, the light, hurried sound of paws approaching. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but when she lifted her head, she saw a shadow emerging from the darkness of the forest. Her eyes widened, her heart racing, and like a miracle, there he was, the stray dog, the dog everyone avoided, the one no one dared touch except her. He was there, panting but determined, as if the forest had no power over him. Emily couldn't believe it. He had found her. You came, she whispered, her voice choked as her tear-filled eyes met the dog's. Without hesitation, the dog came closer, rubbing his head against her legs, as if to say that everything was okay now, that she wasn't alone anymore. The little girl fell to her knees and hugged the dog, the only being who, in that moment, was by her side. His warmth seemed to dispel some of the fear that gripped her. The stray didn't need words to comfort her. His simple act of being there, of his own free will, was all she needed. The two stayed like that for a few minutes, in silence, as night fell over the forest. The dog, with his keen instincts, realized they couldn't stay there. Time was running out, and he knew he had to get her out of that place. With a gentle movement, he stood up and looked at Emily, encouraging her to follow him. She understood immediately. Without question, she stood up and lightly held onto the dog's matted fur, trusting him completely. As the stray led them out of the forest's darkness, the girl felt a strange sense of security. Despite the cold, fear and hunger, that animal, whom everyone deemed insignificant, was now her only light in the dark. He walked with confidence, without hesitation, as if he knew the way back. On the other side, at the mansion, chaos continued. Richard couldn't stop staring at the phone, waiting for any news. Helicopters flew overhead, and Olivia could barely stand. Time seemed like a cruel enemy, stretching out torturously. Everyone was searching for answers, but finding nothing. It was as if Emily had vanished without a trace. However, no one knew that hope was coming from where they least expected. The stray kept moving forward with Emily by his side. Fatigue began to weigh on her thin, fragile legs, but he didn't stop. Even with his body worn from years on the streets, he pressed on with a greater force, his bond with the girl. A bond that, to others, might never have existed, but to him was more real than anything else. Gradually, the mansion's lights began to appear through the trees. Emily saw the lights and in the distance heard familiar voices. The stray kept walking, but now slower, as if he knew his mission was coming to an end. When they finally emerged from the forest, the security guards' voices echoed in surprise and relief. "It's her! It's Emily!" One man's shout cut through the air, and within seconds the search team ran to the girl. Richard and Olivia, hearing the commotion, hurried out of the mansion, and upon seeing their daughter alive, collapsed in tears of relief. They ran to Emily and hugged her as if they would never let her go again. But while everyone focused on the girl, the dog, unnoticed, began to slip away. His task was done. He didn't expect any rewards. He had simply done what needed to be done. Emily's reunion with her parents was an explosion of emotion. Richard, always so controlled and businesslike, was now on his knees in front of his daughter, hugging her with almost desperate strength. His tears, rarely seen by anyone, flowed freely as he repeated his daughter's name. Olivia, usually composed and serene, cried uncontrollably, holding Emily's face with trembling hands, as if she needed to confirm that the girl was really there, alive, in front of them. The search team paused for a moment, watching the scene with a mix of relief and respect. The little heiress had been found, and her parents' worst nightmare was over. The security guards, the authorities, even the household staff watched the reunited family with a sense of duty fulfilled. The chaos and frantic search had finally come to an end, but there was something everyone overlooked, or rather, someone. Amidst the commotion, the stray, quiet and discreet, began to move away from the mansion. With his tired paws and exhausted body, he knew his mission was complete. The girl was safe. Now he could return to his routine of anonymity, wandering the streets in search of scraps of food, invisible to all. As the dog slowly walked back into the forest's darkness, something stopped him. Emily, still wrapped in her parents' arms, looked up, searching for her savior. Her small eyes scanned the lawn, searching every corner. She knew he was there, and deep down, she felt she couldn't let that moment pass. "Wait!" Emily's soft voice called out, but no one except the dog seemed to hear. The stray paused for a brief moment, turning his head. Emily gently broke free from her parents' arms, and before anyone could stop her, ran toward the dog. Richard and Olivia, still overwhelmed with emotion, watched in confusion. When they realized where she was going, the shock hit them. The street dog they had long despised was the reason their daughter was there, safe and sound. "It was him. He saved me," Emily said, her voice choked as she knelt beside the stray, wrapping her arms around his dirty, battered body. The dog, hesitant at first, felt the familiar warmth of the girl and responded with a slight movement of his head, as if to say everything was okay now. The staff, who had always kept their distance from the dog, watched the scene in silence. That animal, who had been shooed away every time he approached the mansion gates, was now the hero. Olivia, her heart still heavy with emotion, exchanged a look with Richard. Neither of them could believe what they were seeing. As Emily stroked the stray's head, Richard finally approached. The man who had always ignored that dirty animal now looked at him in a completely different way. His eyes were still red from crying, but there was something new there, a mix of gratitude and guilt. He knew he owed his daughter's life to that dog, who had been invisible to him for so long. "Emily," Richard began, his voice still trembling, "was it really him?" The girl, still kneeling beside the dog, nodded vigorously. "He found me in the forest, Daddy. He brought me back." Olivia, who had stayed a little further back, took a few steps forward, still processing everything that was happening. In her heart, a whirlwind of emotions consumed her. For months, she had warned Emily to stay away from that dog. He was a street animal, dirty, a health risk, she thought. But now, seeing her daughter there, safe, all of that seemed so insignificant. How is this possible?" Olivia murmured, almost to herself. She looked at the stray, as if seeing him for the first time. That animal, which once seemed to represent everything unpredictable and dangerous, was now the symbol of a life saved. Meanwhile, the dog remained still, allowing Emily to hug and pet him. He didn't expect applause or praise. To him, all that mattered was the well-being of the girl who had shown him kindness when no one else had. But then, something surprising happened. Richard, who until then had kept a physical and emotional distance from the dog, knelt beside Emily. His eyes met the dog's, and at that moment, something deep broke inside him. All his indifference and prejudice against the stray disappeared. He hesitantly reached out and placed his hand on the animal's head, gently stroking him. "Thank you," Richard whispered, his voice choked with emotion. I don't know how to thank you." Olivia slowly approached, still hesitant. Seeing her husband, always pragmatic and controlled, kneeling beside that stray dog was something she never imagined witnessing. But there he was, vulnerable, grateful, and she knew somehow she needed to follow his example. With a soft sigh, she too knelt and extended her hand, gently touching the dog. Emily, watching her parents, smiled, feeling finally understood. She knew that moment would change everything. The dog they had despised was now part of their lives. The morning after Emily's rescue felt different. There was a calm yet also a sense of change at the Carter mansion. The trauma of the previous night still echoed in Richard and Olivia's minds, but an unexpected feeling of gratitude hung over everything. The daughter they thought they had lost forever was now safe, and all thanks to a street dog they had ignored for so long. Max, as Emily had named him, now rested in the garden under the warmth of the sun. For the first time in a long while, he had a place to call home. That patch of ground near Emily's window was now his refuge, but he was still cautious. Though he was surrounded by the luxurious mansion and people who finally noticed him, Max remained reserved. He wasn't sure if he could fully trust. After all, life on the streets had taught him to be careful, always alert to what might happen next. Inside the house, Emily was more excited than ever. After the tension and fear of being lost in the forest, Max's presence by her side made her feel safe. She ran around the house planning how to care for her new friend. "He'll need a comfy bed," she said excitedly, while her housekeeper, still skeptical, simply nodded with a slight smile. The girl seemed to have found a new source of joy in the dog's presence. While Emily dreamed of all the ways she could take care of Max, Richard watched the scene from his office window, lost in thought. The successful businessman, used to controlling every detail of his life and his business, felt strangely out of place. Max, a mere street dog, had shattered his worldview in just one night. Everything he thought he knew about security, protection, and control was challenged by an animal who had nothing but, at the right moment, did the impossible. Richard crossed his arms, still unsure of what to think. He had never allowed himself to get attached to animals. To him, a dog was just another unnecessary responsibility, something that could disrupt the household's meticulous routine. But Max was different. He wasn't just any dog. He was his daughter's hero, Emily's savior, and no matter how much Richard tried to maintain his rational, distant stance, he knew he could never look at that dog the same way again. However, the change wasn't easy. As he left his office, Richard walked down the hallway and found Olivia sitting in the living room, still visibly shaken by the experience. They exchanged glances, and without needing words, they knew what the other was thinking. Max's presence had brought a new dynamic to their lives, and it made them uncomfortable. Olivia, who always prided herself on the mansion's immaculate environment, still couldn't accept the idea of a street dog inside. "He's dirty, Richard," she muttered, running her hands through her hair. "He could bring diseases. He could be unpredictable. We don't know anything about him." Richard sighed. He knew Olivia was just trying to process everything, but at the same time, he felt he couldn't go back. "I know," he replied, his voice low and controlled. "But if it weren't for him, Emily might not be here now." That truth was undeniable, and every time Olivia tried to argue against Max staying, she remembered that fact. But there was still the emotional difficulty. They had spent their entire lives controlling every aspect of their existence. The mansion's impenetrable security, the best schools for Emily, vacations planned down to the smallest detail. And suddenly, chaos had entered their lives through a nameless dog, a stray that had changed everything. That same afternoon, Emily insisted that Max get a bath. The girl, with the typical determination of a child, was set on caring for him as if he were a member of the family. She called one of the staff to help, and with care began preparing a space in the garden to wash the dog. Max, still wary, watched from a distance. This was new to him. He had never received this kind of attention and didn't quite know how to react. When Emily and the staff member approached with buckets of water and a hose, Max hesitated for a moment, but the presence of the girl, with her bright eyes and sincere smile, made him stay. He knew he could trust her. The bath was a memorable event. The stray, who had carried years of dirt and neglect in his fur, began to transform before everyone's eyes. As the water washed over him, the dirt disappeared, revealing a light brown coat no one had noticed before. Emily laughed with joy as she scrubbed Max, and he, finally relaxed, let her affection wash away more than just the grime from his body. In a way, that bath was also washing away the invisible scars he carried from the streets. As Olivia watched the scene from the porch, something inside her began to change. She was still far from fully accepting the idea of Max being part of their lives, but seeing the sparkle in Emily's eyes and how grateful and serene the dog seemed, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of tenderness. Maybe this isn't so bad, she thought, though she wasn't ready to admit it out loud. The days that followed brought new experiences for Max and the Carter family. Now clean and with his coat brushed, he looked like a different dog. He was no longer the forgotten stray wandering the streets, but he still maintained a humble and discreet demeanor. He never demanded anything. He always patiently waited by Emily's side, as if he knew he was there by a miracle and didn't want to push his luck. However, as the days passed, Max's presence changed more than just Emily's life. Richard, who had once viewed the dog with a mix of distrust and gratitude, began to develop a quiet respect for him. During his walks in the garden, he often stopped beside Max, observing him in silence. It was as if he was trying to understand what fascinated him so much about that dog. Max was a symbol of something Richard had always avoided: the unexpected, the uncontrollable. Max didn't follow rules, didn't fit into the meticulously planned world Richard had built, but paradoxically, he had brought the greatest lesson the man had ever received. Olivia, on the other hand, was caught in an internal struggle. She saw how Max made Emily happy and how the dog had brought something new and positive into their home, but it was still hard for her to fully accept. At night, alone in her room, she reflected on how much her life had changed in such a short time. The fear of losing Emily in the forest was still an open wound in her heart, but there was something more. Max, the animal that represented everything she feared, disorder, the unpredictable, was healing a part of her she didn't even know needed healing. As time went on, Olivia began to make small concessions. She allowed Emily to walk Max around the property and even suggested they buy him a new collar. If he's going to stay, he should at least look the part, she said, trying to hide her growing affection. One morning, while Emily was playing with Max in the garden, Olivia approached, carrying a bowl of water. Max, who always watched her with respect, raised his head and looked at her, waiting for her reaction. The tension between them was palpable. Olivia placed the bowl on the ground and hesitantly reached out her hand. Max slowly approached, sniffing her, and finally allowed her to pet him for the first time. It was a brief moment, but deeply significant. Olivia, who had always been so afraid of making room for the unexpected, felt something break inside her. The softness of Max's fur under her hand brought an unexpected sense of peace, and in that instant, she knew there was no turning back. Max, the street dog no one wanted, was now part of the Carter family in a way no one could have predicted. The days continued to pass, and Max's presence at the Carter mansion became a well-established fact. Every morning, Emily woke up early to run out to the garden and find her faithful friend. They spent hours together, playing under the sun, as if they were old friends who had known each other forever. The staff, once reluctant, began to see the dog differently, with a look of respect, almost as if Max were a kind of silent guardian of the house. However, as the mansion's routine adapted to the new reality with Max, something began to bother Emily. Despite his cleaner appearance and calm demeanor, Max seemed too tired. Sometimes he couldn't keep up with Emily in their games, and occasionally his steps faltered. The girl, worried, told her parents, but Richard and Olivia tried to reassure her. "He's just a street dog who's been through a lot, sweetheart," Richard said, stroking Emily's hair. "Now that he's in a safe place, he'll get better over time." But Emily felt there was more to it. The connection she had with Max went beyond words. She could see in his eyes a deep exhaustion, a pain he seemed to be trying to hide. After insisting, Olivia finally agreed to take Max to the vet. "Now that he's part of the family," Olivia said with a resigned sigh, "we need to take care of him like we take care of ourselves." On the day of the appointment, Emily was excited, believing the vet would simply confirm that Max needed time to fully recover. They took him to the pet shop, where he would also get a full bath, a trim, and a general checkup. When they arrived, Emily firmly held onto Max's leash, her heart racing with the anticipation of seeing him finally treated with the care he deserved. At the pet shop, Max was handled with care. He seemed nervous with all the activity, but he trusted Emily, and that kept him calm. The groomer began working on Max's coat, removing the tangles and revealing his true appearance, a medium-sized dog with light brown, soft fur. Max looked like a different animal after the bath. However, despite his renewed appearance, something in his behavior continued to concern the professionals. After the grooming session, the vet called Max in for a more detailed examination. Emily, always by Max's side, held his paw, trying to calm him. "Everything will be fine," she repeated softly. Max, as always, seemed to understand her words and returned her calm look, even though he was tired. The vet carefully examined Max, feeling his body with experienced hands, observing every detail, and soon noticed something he couldn't ignore. A slight swelling on the dog's ribs caught his attention. The vet's heart sank, but he remained calm in front of Emily and Olivia, who were watching the examination with attentive eyes. "We need to do some more detailed tests," the vet said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "It could be something simple, but it's better to be sure." Olivia and Emily exchanged a quick glance, and a sense of unease began to grow in both of them. The vet took Max for an X-ray, while their anxiety mounted. Emily clung to her mother, feeling for the first time the fear of losing something that had become so important to her. Time seemed to drag on, and each minute of waiting felt like an eternity for the girl. When the vet returned, the serious expression on his face made Olivia's heart race. He took a deep breath before speaking, carefully choosing his words. "Max has a tumor in his lungs," he said, directly but gently. "Unfortunately, it seems to be quite advanced. It's likely that he's had this disease for a long time and, well, the prognosis isn't good." Emily stood still. Her small hands, which had been holding Max's leash so securely, now trembled. What did those words mean? Max was sick. How could it be true? He, the hero, the savior who had pulled her out of the forest's darkness, was now facing an even darker force inside him. He's going to be okay, right?" Emily asked, her voice fragile, almost a whisper. The vet lowered his eyes for a moment, unable to meet the girl's pain. Olivia knelt beside her daughter, holding her by the shoulders, trying to stay strong in the face of the inevitable. "We'll do everything we can to make sure he doesn't suffer, sweetheart," Olivia said, her voice choked. "Max will need a lot of care now. He's not alone." The vet explained that Max had an aggressive form of cancer, something that, due to his life on the streets and lack of medical care, had spread uncontrollably. The advanced disease was affecting his breathing, and although he still tried to act like the strong, loyal dog he had always been, his days were numbered. Treatment could prolong his life a bit, but a cure was impossible. Emily couldn't hold back her tears. She didn't know exactly what poor prognosis meant, but she understood enough to know that her friend was seriously ill. What hurt the most was the thought that Max, who had saved her without asking for anything in return, was now facing a battle she didn't know how to help him with. The world, which had once seemed so safe with Max by her side, was now falling apart before her eyes. Max, however, seemed unfazed. Even in that moment, he licked Emily's hand gently, as if to reassure her. He was aware of the pain she felt, but as always, his only concern was the girl. For Max, the simple fact of being there with his little friend was all that mattered. Even with the disease spreading inside him, his instinct to protect and comfort Emily remained undiminished. On the way home, the silence in the car was suffocating. Emily looked at Max, who rested calmly in the back seat, exhausted but still with his sweet gaze. Olivia gripped the steering wheel tightly, struggling not to fall apart. And Richard, on the phone, was cancelling all his important meetings for the next few days. He knew Max's time was limited, and he didn't want to miss a single moment with the dog who had become so vital to his family. When they arrived at the mansion, the house felt darker. Emily took Max to his spot in the garden and sat beside him, gently stroking his fur. She wanted to believe everything would be fine, but the fear of losing Max now was overwhelming. Max, for his part, nestled close to Emily, feeling the warmth and love she had always given him, as if he knew that moment was precious. In the days that followed, the Carter family rallied around Max. Richard, who had always been distant from animals, now spent hours in the garden, sitting beside Emily and the dog. Olivia, who had once rejected the idea of Max being near the house, was now the first to care for him, preparing his special meals, as instructed by the vet. Max was now the center of their attention, and every gesture of affection seemed like an attempt to make up for the days when he had been ignored. Emily, however, felt the weight of the situation the most. She could hardly sleep at night, fearing that at any moment Max wouldn't be there by her side anymore. She began dreaming of him, reliving the moment when he rescued her from the forest. But in these dreams, something always changed. Instead of Max saving her, it was she who tried to save him. But in the end, he disappeared. One afternoon, while they were all gathered in the garden, Emily approached her parents, her eyes swollen from crying. I don't want Max to suffer," she said, her voice weak and broken. Olivia immediately hugged her heart breaking at the pain her daughter was facing. Richard, holding back his tears, knelt beside the girl, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Emily," he began, his voice rough, "we're doing the best we can to make sure Max is comfortable, and he knows how much you love him. What matters now is that we're with him, and that he's not alone." Max, lying beside them, lifted his head and looked directly at Emily. His gaze was weaker than usual, but there was still a light in his eyes. He knew his time was running out, but his loyalty and love for the girl were unwavering. Max's diagnosis was a devastating blow for the Carter family, but for Emily, it was as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. The girl, who had already faced the fear of loss when she got lost in the forest, was now facing a new kind of terror. The fear of losing her best friend, the one who had saved her, and who now needed saving. Emily decided she would do everything to cure Max. She couldn't accept the idea that after all he had done for her, he could leave without her fighting for him with all her strength. And with the determination that only a child could have, she set out on a mission to save her hero. In the days following the vet's visit, Emily hardly left Max's side. She made sure to arrange a space for him in her own room, moving all her toys and decorations to make room for an improvised bed filled with soft blankets. "He's going to stay with me now," she said firmly to her parents as she set up the space beside her bed. Neither Olivia nor Richard dared to argue with her. Max, though exhausted and frail, seemed to feel the girl's care. His breathing was increasingly labored, but his gaze remained calm, as if he wanted to reassure Emily that somehow he was okay just by being near her. "I won't leave you alone, Max," Emily whispered every night before falling asleep. And even when sleep finally overtook her, she kept her hand stretched out, gently touching Max's fur, as if to make sure he was still there with her. Emily's parents, driven by their daughter's silent desperation, began exploring all possible options. Though the vet had made it clear that the prognosis wasn't good, Richard refused to give up. He made calls to specialists, consulted alternative treatments, and even considered experimental therapies. Nothing seemed too much when it came to saving the dog who had saved his daughter. That's how they discovered a veterinary clinic in another city, where an animal oncology specialist offered a chance, albeit a small one, to extend Max's life. The treatment would involve risky surgery to remove the tumor, followed by a long recovery process. It wasn't a cure, but it could give Max a few more months of life, maybe even more, if he responded well. When Richard told Emily about the surgery, her eyes lit up with a mix of hope and fear. "Can he get better?" she asked, almost breathless. Richard, his voice hesitant, tried to be honest. "The doctors said it could help him, but it's not a certainty, sweetheart. What we can do is give him the best care possible." "Then let's do it," Emily said with unwavering determination. "He saved me, Daddy. Now it's my turn to save him." The day of the surgery came quickly. Emily was by Max's side the entire way to the clinic. The dog seemed calm, as always, even as the preparations for the operation began. Emily held his paw, feeling a deep ache inside her, but trying to be strong. She knew Max could feel her presence, and as hard as it was, she didn't want him to see her fear. "It's going to be okay," she said, her voice trembling as she looked into Max's eyes. "I'll be here when you wake up, I promise." The medical team prepared Max for surgery, and as he was taken to the operating room, Emily stayed behind, watching until the last moment. She knew she couldn't go in with him, but in her heart, she felt that a part of her was there, fighting alongside him. The hours that followed were the longest of Emily's life. She could hardly sit still, pacing back and forth in the waiting room, her parents always close by, but unsure how to comfort her. Olivia tried to calm her, but Emily remained silent, her eyes fixed on the door leading to the operating room. "He's going to come back," she kept repeating to herself. "He has to come back." Finally, the vet entered the room, looking tired but calm. Emily ran to him, her breath caught in her chest. "The surgery was difficult," he began, kneeling down to be at Emily's eye level. "But Max is a strong dog. He made it through." Emily let out a sob, tears filling her eyes. "Is he going to be okay? Is he going to get better?" The vet smiled, though there was sadness in his eyes. "We were able to remove part of the tumor, which should give him more time. But he's still going to need special care, and we can't guarantee how much time he'll have. The most important thing is that he's comfortable and surrounded by people who love him." Emily nodded, though the words, "we can't guarantee," echoed in her mind. But in that moment, all that mattered was that Max was alive. He had survived the surgery, and now, more than ever, she would be by his side every step of the way. When Max was finally released from the recovery room, he looked fragile, his eyes still heavy, and his body marked by the surgery. Emily ran to him, kneeling beside him, and Max, even weakened, moved his head to gently nuzzle her face. Emily held his face tenderly, tears streaming freely. "I promised I'd be here when you woke up," she said between sobs, "and I'll be with you every day. We'll get through this together." In the days that followed, Emily devoted herself entirely to caring for Max. She spent hours by his side, reading stories, singing softly, and stroking his fur. During the nights, when Max was especially tired or in pain, Emily would curl up next to him on the makeshift bed, holding his paw as she had before the surgery. Her sweet, gentle voice filled the room with songs she made up, hoping that somehow her presence would heal the pain Max felt. "I know you're tired, Max," she whispered, with her head resting beside him, "but you're my hero, and heroes never give up, right?" Max, despite his weakness, always found the strength to show the girl that he was there. Even as the days passed, he always tried to get up, give her a few licks on the face, and rest by her side as if he knew that every moment together was precious. Olivia and Richard watched from a distance, their hearts breaking but also filled with pride at Emily's strength. They knew the reality was harsh, and that Max's time, even with the surgery, was limited, but seeing their daughter's dedication, her unshakable belief that love could heal everything, touched something deep within them. Max was no longer just the dog who had saved Emily in the forest. He was part of the soul of their home, and his presence had changed them all in ways they could never explain. Each day with Max became a gift. The family grew closer, doing everything to ensure that Max's days were filled with love and comfort. Emily, tireless, was always by his side, reminiscing about happy moments and promising they would be together forever. Time passed, and each day with Max was treated like a priceless treasure. Emily continued to care for him with love, dedicating herself fully to making sure her friend was comfortable and loved. Nights were filled with her soft songs, and the days were filled with whispered conversations, walks in the garden, and moments of deep affection. Max seemed to respond to this with a strength no one expected. One morning, when Emily woke up beside Max, she noticed something different. He didn't seem as tired, his body no longer stiff and painful like in the previous weeks. When she got out of bed, he followed her with an energy he hadn't shown in a long time. The girl froze, staring at the dog with wide eyes. Max was moving with ease, his eyes shining in a way she hadn't seen in a long time. It was as if, suddenly, the disease that had been consuming him had vanished. "Max, are you okay?" Emily asked, still in shock, as he wagged his tail and licked her hand in response. Her heart raced with joy. When Olivia entered the room to check on her daughter, she was astonished to see Max not only standing but walking around with energy. "Richard," she called, summoning her husband, who appeared shortly after. They all gathered in Emily's room, unable to believe what they were seeing. The vet had said Max's days were numbered, that the surgery would only prolong his life for a short while. And now, there he was, acting as if he were completely healthy. Richard, with a stunned expression, ran his hand over the dog's body, looking for any sign of pain or weakness. Nothing. Max was strong, healthy. How was this possible? In the days that followed, Max continued to surprise everyone. His health seemed to improve with each passing day, and soon he was running around the garden, playing with Emily like in the early days after his rescue. Olivia, always skeptical and rational, began to question what was happening. They returned to the vet, where more tests were done, and the diagnosis was clear. The tumor that had once threatened Max's life had simply disappeared. There was no trace of the disease. The vet, astonished, said he had never seen anything like it. "We don't have a scientific explanation for this," he said, shaking his head with an incredulous smile. "But whatever happened, it's a miracle." The news spread quickly. The staff, who had initially been afraid of Max, began to see him as something almost magical. The neighbors, who had once been indifferent to the stray dog wandering the area, now asked about him, fascinated by the story of the dog who had defied all expectations. Max was no longer just a dog. He was a symbol of hope, of healing, and of an unbreakable bond. But for Emily, the explanation was simple. The love she and Max shared was what had healed him. She had always believed Max was special, and now, more than ever, she felt that their connection had transcended what others could understand. He had saved her when she was lost in the forest, and now she had saved him, offering him a home, care, and unconditional love. Max and Emily became inseparable. The girl, who had once been overly protected by her parents, began to live with more freedom, exploring life with her faithful companion by her side. They ran together across the field, climbed hills, and ventured into places that once seemed frightening, but now, with Max, felt safe and welcoming. Richard and Olivia, watching Emily's transformation, understood that the strength of that dog lay in something money could never buy: love. One night, while Emily was sitting in the garden looking at the stars, Max lay down beside her, resting his head on her lap. The full moon lit up the sky, and Emily felt her heart light, as if all her worries had disappeared. She stroked Max's soft fur, feeling the gentle beat of his heart. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered, looking at the dog. "You knew you were going to be okay." Max, in his serenity, looked at her with the same wise, loyal eyes he had always had. Emily felt a wave of emotion wash over her, and tears of gratitude rolled down her face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of pure love and happiness. Max had become more than just her dog. He was a part of her soul. Time passed, and Max continued by Emily's side, accompanying her on every step, every adventure, and every new challenge. Life at the mansion was forever changed. The once cold and calculated atmosphere was now filled with laughter, joyful barks, and the sound of Emily and Max running together. Emily's parents, who had once controlled everything with rigid precision, learned to appreciate the unexpected, the beauty of letting the heart guide some of life's choices. Years later, when Emily was older, she looked back and thought about all that Max had meant to her. He had taught her about courage, love, and the importance of never giving up on those we love. He had saved her, not just in the forest, but also from a life without purpose, without the deep feeling of empathy and connection. Max's miracle was never fully understood, but maybe deep down it didn't need to be. Some things in life simply happen because they are meant to, like the friendship between a girl and a dog who, against all odds, saved each other. Max lived many years by Emily's side, and his story was remembered by everyone who knew him as a true testament that love, in its purest form, has the power to transform and heal. When he finally passed away, it was in peace, surrounded by the love of his family. But his presence, his courage, and the miracle of his recovery would never be forgotten. Emily, now grown, still remembers her faithful friend, knowing that the connection between them transcends time and space. And every time she looks up at the starry sky, she whispers, "Thank you, Max, for saving me, and for letting me save you too." I'd love to know more about you. Share in the comments where you're watching from, and if you have any pets, they truly make life better, don't they? If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me continue creating content that means so much to me, and I'm so grateful to have you here. Thank you.